All right, chapter 9, number 12. So we were speaking about a sitzes being made out of wool. So stam sema amar b'Torah a poskim. Now, when it says wool in the Torah or in halachic works, without any specification, right? It's not the wool of this or the wool of that. It just mentions the word wool, sema, without any qualification. This refers to sheep, right? Either female or male sheep, with sheep's wool. But talus, shasehu semer va'orev, who shall semer gefen, or meshi kadoime, or the hepech, she'ev semer shisi hu min acher. So just to for those who are not familiar with weaving, most of us don't weave our own clothes anymore. But if you ever have the opportunity to weave, there's a thread that goes lengthways and then the thread that goes across. So he says that if you had wool on one direction and the other direction was different material, right? So then Yirush Shamayim lo yavarech hatalas kazeh. Someone who fears heaven, for lack of a better translation. In other words, someone who really wants to do the right thing should avoid making a bracha on this garment. Why? Because although we said before that the wool, the actual sitters, mean the actual strings, if they're made of wool, works for any garment, but there is a view, minority view, that the woolen strings only work on a woolen garment. In other words, that the garment and the strings have to be made out of the same material. And since this is a composite, so we should try and avoid that. So in the ideal world, you should have a woolen garment with woolen strings. And I think this is where we finished off last time. We mentioned that's why when people have a cotton garment with woolen strings, there's a question if you can make a blessing on that or not. So for married men or those before who wear a talus, a big one when they daven, doesn't really matter because you can make the bracha on the talus and include the small one. But those who are only wearing the small one should really try and have a woolen garment with woolen strings, even if they make the bracha on that first and then change it to cotton if they have in a hotter climate. Right, the chain talus shel meshi, but sisters shel tzemer. So likewise, if it was made of silk and the strings are wool, lo yavarach alav, best not to make a blessing on that. Better to make a bracha on a woolen one and wrap yourself in that, and then you can switch. But if the sitzes, the strings are also silk, attached to a silk garment, that you can make a blessing on.
Does Chabad allow a silk talus?
No one does. It actually says here in the brackets that it's so uncommon in our country, I mean Ashkenazi countries, because remember the strings have to be spun for the purpose of the mitzvah. So very rarely, even if you could buy silk string somewhere, it wasn't made for the purpose.
Yeah.
I know a fellow in Israel. Actually, his parents were from Rhode Island, but my in-laws were, so I sort of know him through there. And he's friends with my sons. He has in Yerushalayim, he has the string factory where they make the strings. Well, I'm sure there's more than one, But that's what he does, and they spin them, hand spun, because machines can't have intentions, right? You can't. They do sell them with machine made strings. It's a little questionable, the machine made ones, because what they do is they say, when they turn on the machine, they say this is for the sake of for the mitzvah. But of course, while it's actually being made, machines can't really have intentions. They can't have in mind that it's for the mitzvah. So it's much better to have handmade ones. Slightly more expensive, but well worth it to make sure we do the mitzvah properly. So it says, then if you have a partial garment, it's made partially out of wool and partially out of silk, that's the worst. It becomes even more questionable. Better to have full silk or full wool. Full wool. Okay. Number 13. Okay, so you made it all properly. You got this perfect talus. Now, those who wear tzitzis will know that sometimes the strings break. So now what? At what point? So if it was made in the first instance being too short or something, then it's never going to be good. But it was made properly. And if it breaks, when does it become problematic? So 13. You've got the tzitzis and one of the strings of the 4, which are folded over. They go through the hole, so it makes 8. So you've got 4 on either side. So one of the 8, it snaps. Now, what happens is, when you have enough length that you could tie a small bow. So it's, let's say 1/10 of its size, original size. It's got a little bit left, but you could tie a small bow. The Haino Arba Gedulim. So this is 4 thumb widths, right? So we said this was the, let's get in the camera, the measurement, the width going across the top of the thumb. So if it's 4 of them, then that works. Okay, or shnei chutim and shneim kashir, or 2 strings remain, right? So you've got a kashera. I will in the shloisha chutim. Once 3 go, then it's problematic. So I'm going to actually summarize ahead, just so as we go through the wording, I'll make it more clear. So if 1 tears, but there's still a little bit after the knot, the top knot, then that's fine. I hope everyone can sort of imagine it. If 2 go, then that's also potentially fine. We'll say when it's not. 3 is already too many. Now, 2 can also be problematic if it's the same string. Meaning, so you had 4 strings that went in the hole, and they came out the other side, so you end up with 8. So you got 4 on each side. So if the 2 that broke are on the same side, then they can't be the same string. So then that's fine. But if you've got 1 on each side, and it could potentially, therefore, be the same string, then it's problematic. You can't have the same string short on both ends. That's the truth is, maybe we'll just go to the next one, because it's
Rabbi, you're only talking about the tzitzis on the talus, not anywhere else.
Yeah, on the talus,
Okay.
the large talus for davening, or the small one that the men wear during the day. Okay, 14. Now, if you look at the strings, you'll see they're twisted out of smaller strings. There's thinner strings that are twisted around to make a thicker string. So if one of the mini strings that are part of the twisted string tear totally, it's like the whole string tore, even though it was only one thread. So that's no good. It's like it doesn't exist anymore. Okay, 15. Talis sheyesh b'tzitzis nech l'shnei chalakim. So what happens is you've got your nice talis, it's all perfect. Then whatever reason, it got cut into two. You know, some people when they fold it on those folds, they really get it nice and tight and it wears through, or something. I don't know. It's in whatever happened, an accident. Somehow it gets divided into two. So you end up now, instead of one four-cornered garment with a string on each corner, you have two four-cornered garments with only two of the corners with strings. Because the talis got broken, cut, whatever, into two. So, and he says, come on for an example. He says Shalano was very common with our talises. Now, not nowadays because we have a higher standard of living, better income, and everything is made of better quality. But seemingly in those days, what they did to make a big talis, they weren't able to have such large woolen garments. They often had two smaller ones, and they were sewn together to make one. And sometimes it comes apart. They did it to launder it, or the sakno to fix it. And then they re-sew the seam, or it came apart at seam, whatever it was. Now, when we're talking about a big talus, the big talus we're done with, now, each piece is big enough to wrap yourself in, so then it's not really problematic. So okay, therefore, these two sitters that are left on the four-cornered garment, because remember we said before, you can't tie the strings then make the garment. The garment has to be in existence before the strings are on. Right? If the strings are put on, even if they're put on perfectly, but before the garment is fitting, then when the garment came into existence, halakhically existence, it's a garment that's fitting for the mitzvah. It's like the strings were already there. They weren't made. They were already in existence. So then you have to untie them and tie them back. Right? But in this case, since each piece is big enough to be a talus in its own right, it's no problem. So you can sew it back together, because each piece, even though you only got strings on two corners, but it's fitting to have strings on all four corners. So when we attach it to another one that's the same, it's not like we've made it when it already had strings, because each piece fit the requirements to have strings in its own right. Right. Now, if it wasn't large enough, each piece, then once you attach it back together, you have to untie the strings and tie them back together. Sorry. So if each piece was big enough, you don't have to retie them. But if each piece was not big enough, so you have to untie the whole thing. And you have to put them back together like that.
I don't think they do it anymore these days.
No, it's very unusual, because again, it's like Today, people have, we have more money. Don't forget, people in those days, they lived in a one room shack, and they had black bread and an onion for a meal. And then if they were middle class, they piece of herring.
Yeah.
Baruch Hashem, we live a much better standard of living. Even tefillin, for example. The tefillin, the boxes, it's also made out of, it's made of the animal skin. Today, generally, they're all made out of one piece. It's one piece, and that's ideally how it should be. But if you ever see old tefillin, it's multiple pieces that have, I'm going to loosely say glued together. It's not regular glue. It has to also be made out of the animal skin. But it was because they were poor. They couldn't get the larger pieces of skin. They couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
So today it's not so common. Yeah. What you do see is this is the origin. You sometimes see a talus across the middle of the back. There's like a fancy piece. Right? Where did that come from? That originally was covering the seam.
Yeah.
So they made, like a decoration. And today some people have it too. It's just decorative. It doesn't really cover the seam. Okay. All right, 16. So again, we're talking about a situation where the talus, the sitters, was made all perfect, and a problem happened. What happened? One of the corners was cut or torn and is completely separated from the talus. Now, the corner that cut off, is smaller than 3 thumb widths by 3 thumb widths. Now, the significance of that size is that's the size of a patch. We say anything small than any piece of cloth smaller than that has no use. And this size is used for various halachic rules. Like, say, for example, garments can become tomei. Today we're not worried about it, but if you go to the Beis Hamikdash, not only you had to be tahor, well, loosely translated as ritually pure, spiritually pure, but also your clothes had to, that you wore when you went in. So not only did a person have to go to mikveh themselves before they went, the clothes also had to be immersed in the mikveh. But we say a piece of garment that's less than 3 by 3 thumb widths, it never becomes tomei. It's not considered a garment. It's not considered of any use because you wouldn't even use it for a patch. So just in general, for many halachas, this is the minimum size. Right. So this piece, even if you sew it back on, you can't retie the stitches on it. Now, obviously, you can't just sew it back on with the strings attached, because then it's ready made. You have to actually make it. But even if you untie it and sew it back on, if it was that small, you can't even retie the stitches on it. Because since it was smaller than that minimum size, it's not even considered like a patch. So it's like it's non-existent, even though it's there. Just too small. Now we have in general in halacha, we have sometimes when something is there, we consider it not there. It's an interesting concept. So let's say, for an example, let's just say there was a religion that an idol, they worshipped ram's horns. Let's just say, just make one up. They worshipped ram's horns. And, they're offering sacrifices to the little ram's horn. And so the ram horn itself is the idol. So an idol, a Jew is not allowed to have any benefit from. Has to be destroyed. So let's say somehow this shofar, this ram's horn, comes into your possession. So since it has to be destroyed halachically, you have to destroy it, you can't have any benefit from it. It's as if it was destroyed, even though it's still in existence. So if you would use that ram's horn for Rosh Hashanah, you didn't do the mitzvah. Because even though you held it in your hand and you blew it and the sounds came out, we consider it as if it wasn't there, as if it didn't exist. Because halachically it's meant to be destroyed. Right, so it's just an interesting concept, and we see it by a few other things. Right, so if you ever study the Mishnah of Sukkos, and it talks about that, the lulav, the esrog, if it came from an idol or it came a certain city that had to be destroyed, right? You can't do the mitzvah because it's like it's not there.
Rabbi,
So this, yes.
Suppose that you're able to find someone who follows that cult,
Mm-hmm.
and he were to basically, what's the term? Denounce, reject, basically say, I consider it hefker.
Yeah.
Would you then be able to?
Yes, so that's an interesting point. So a non-Jew can denounce that idol. If a Jew worships an idol, God forbid, he can't nullify it. It remains forbidden because unfortunately a Jew worshipped it. But if a non-Jew realize, for whatever reason, that the idol is not really an idol, it's not really a god, and they give up on it. This is a question whether they actually have to say it or if they have to break something from it. But whatever the circumstances be, they denounced this idol, they nullified its significance, then it's no longer an idol. Yeah. So this shofar in my made-up example, either it came from a Jew, God forbid, or a non-Jew, also God forbid, they shouldn't worship idols either, but you somehow got it without it being nullified. So the same thing, if once this corner was smaller than 3 thumb widths, right, by 3 by 3, then since it's too small to have any significance, so even though we saw it back on, it's like it's not there. Right, it's even too small to be a patch. So fill in this chabra in the talus, even if we reconnect it, it's like it's disconnected. So that's a view of Yesh Lahachmer Kain, and there are those who are strict about this. So that's if it came off totally, it was totally disconnected. But if it wasn't totally disconnected, now it's still hanging by a thread, literally. Since it's slightly still connected, then according to everyone, you can reconnect it and it's still considered part of the talus. But tzitzis yatel boy achat tefirah ksheirus, and you don't even have to retie the tzitzis because it was always part of the garment. It never became not part of the garment. Now we have a custom that we sew the cloth that's on the corner. We sew a little cloth. So what we do, we sew a piece of cloth 3 by 3 onto the corner. So when you look at the tzitzis, you'll see normally on the inside, there's a piece of some people particularly try and have a silk piece. Some people it's cotton, but there's another piece of cloth there that's 3 by 3 or larger than 3 by 3. So like reinforces it and it keeps it that the corner is always more than 3 by 3. And therefore, sorry?
3x3 agudalim, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The width of a thumb. They're larger than 3x3. Okay. Then there's just a point just to mention that Rashi in the Gemara Menachos, he says that really it should be a different material to the tzitzis that you sew on, because they were worried that there might be some threads hanging, and if it's the same thread, it'll somehow get tied in instead of the tzitzis string. That's why you see there's generally a different material. Okay. 17. Now, Yesh Oimrim, actually, we might just summarize the next few because it's getting rather technical. But so there is a view that the entire corner area where you could attach the tzitzis, that there shouldn't be any stitches at all there. Right. So for an example, if the talus was made of linen, you shouldn't sew it with linen threads, but only use like silk or something. Right. And this, if it's wool, you shouldn't sew it with woolen threads, because we're worried if it's hanging down, it may be get mixed in with the actual sister strings and various things. So again, if you look, you'll notice the stitching on the corner is also a slight different material to to the garment. Okay, now 18. Let's say
Well, somebody has to find me one or I walk out of here. I need it.
you need a pair. Let's speak to Rabbi Smith. I'm sure he'll organize a pair for you. I'll mention to him. Okay. Yirches 18. I'd say I'd bring back a nice pair from Australia, but they're the same ones from Israel or New York or America. Same that you get anywhere else. You know, they don't make tzitzis with Aboriginal art. No unique ones here. Okay. So you have this fellow. He's made his tzitzis, and what he wants to do is he wants to make them nicer. So he wants to take off the strings and put nicer strings. Either, the strings got a little old and dirty, or he just found better quality wool. Whatever it is, he wants to put on new ones to make it nicer. The other ones are still kosher. We're not talking about that there's something wrong with them. They're still valid, but he wants to remove them. So he's allowed to. Now, why shouldn't he be allowed to? You might have thought there was a problem because when the tzitzis are on, there's a mitzvah being done. And if you take them off, even though you're replacing them, but let's say it takes 10 minutes to replace, for that 10 minutes, you've nullified the mitzvah. So you may have thought you weren't allowed to, but you are allowed to. Okay, you can't be wearing them while you're doing it, because then you're wearing a garment, four-corner garment without tzitzis. But if you're wearing a different one and you're working on it, you're allowed to. So, and the other thing to be careful of is that you can't, the old strings, even when they tore and you're not using them because they're not good anymore, they can't go into the garbage. They have to be disposed of respectfully. Many people put them in the shamus, in the geniza, where the old, worn out prayer books and things go. And that's the best thing. All right. Some people in 19, it says some people use them as a bookmark in the Siddur or other holy books, and that way they've taken it from one mitzvah and they use it for another mitzvah. It gets to help them in their learning. You don't have to do that, but it's okay. So number 20, we'll go back to learning inside. Not as technical. Okay, in Bar Shabbos Beis Knesses. What happens? We're talking about on Shabbos you come to shul and you you see there's a problem with the strings. Now, if it's a weekday, why are we talking about Shabbos? Because a weekday, there's no problems. You just fix it, tie it back up. Let's just say, for example, the top knots came undone. So you say the Shem mitzvah sitzes, you say you're doing it for the sake of the mitzvah of sitzes, and you retie it, no problem, fixed. But on Shabbos, you're not allowed to tie a knot. So you're stuck. Or some other problem. So you come Shabbos, and you find that the sitzes are damaged. And there's no one else to borrow one from. Okay, many shuls have spare ones, so you ask for a spare one. But in this particular case, there's no spare one. And he's embarrassed to be the only guy in shul without a talus. He's embarrassed. Now, since today it's impossible to fix it, he's allowed to wear this talus even though it's not good. And of course, he can't make a blessing. But it's interesting. Cover the Brius is one of the places, we'll loosely translate it as human dignity. So if it was a regular day, not a Shabbos, regular weekday, so this concept of human dignity doesn't apply because you have it out. Retie it. Get a new string. Fix it. But since on Shabbos, there's nothing you can do about it. You're stuck no matter what. And you're going to feel humiliated. So you're allowed to wear this talus. Now we're going to qualify this a little bit. When do we say that this rule applies? You did not know there was a problem before Shabbos. Took you totally by surprise. Shabbos morning. But if you knew the problem existed before Shabbos, then you're not allowed to wear this talus because you should have fixed it. If you had the opportunity to fix it, you knew about it. The fact that you didn't fix it, that's your problem. It's only if a person came on Shabbos and they discovered. So it's one of the few places that we see that human dignity overrules certain things under certain circumstances. Okay. 21. A person is wearing a garment that requires tzitzis, but it doesn't have any. So, Hari is there, bottle Mrs. Atzai. Now, this person is at that moment nullifying a positive commandment. So he's transgressing a positive commandment at that moment. And you have to be careful about certain garments that are made with four corners. So some ponchos, for example, could be an issue. Okay, some of them are like very thin plastic disposable ones. It's not really considered a garment, but a proper poncho, most of them don't come with sitzes, but they could require one. So what do? You got one of these four-cornered garments, So the easiest thing to do is you cut one of the corners, you round it off. So instead of being a 4-corner garment, it's a 3-cornered and 1 rounded corner. So if you ever look at a kapota, right? Kapota is like a rabbinical, well, originally it's called a Prince Albert suit, in certain places in Europe. But the type of kapota that many rabbis wear, it has a slit in the back halfway up. And so it's actually a 4-corner garment. Now you would look, if you had sitters on those corners, they'd be dragging in the dirt, different things. So if you will look at one carefully, you'll see that one of the corners is round. So it's not the front 2 corners, and the back ones, you have one on top of the other. So the one on top is square, but the one on the back has been rounded off. So that's, I'm sure if you order a Prince Albert suit from a non-Jewish tailor, he won't do that. But if you go to one of the places that sell kapotas for Jews, you'll see that the corner's rounded off. So it's a semicircle instead of a corner. Otherwise, it could require sitters. So that's an example. In kafel as a keren, now folding over the corner and sewing it up so it's round, that's not good enough. You actually have to, because it's still considered part of the garment, even though it's folded up and sewn. You actually have to cut it and round it off. And nullifying this mitzvah is very serious. There's a spiritual punishment again for those someone's doing on purpose, right? And anyone who's very careful to do the mitzvahs properly, they'll be worthy to perceive the Shekhinah, the divine presence. All right, so that is the laws of tzitzis. Any questions? Okay, no questions.
No question.
As I said,
Isn't there
Since we don't
also,
make
you were
the
talking
leap.
about,
Since we
Sorry?
don't make the talit,
Mordechai?
we don't have to worry about most of these things. We buy the talit ready.
yeah, a lot of the things today we don't have to worry about because you buy one. First of all, just while mentioning it, you got to be careful who you buy them from.
Right.
Right, so you'll see they come with a hechsher. And you think some people think, oh, what I need a hechsher on this, different things, and but it's to make sure it's made properly. There was recently a guy scamming, and he had Arabs in Israeli prisons that he was paying to tie the strings, which has to be a Jew that ties them. And people are buying cheap sisters, and they look great. And it's handmade, but obviously they were no good. So you have to make sure you get the right ones. You have to, from a reliable place with a hechsher attached, rabbinical supervision. And but yeah, a lot of things you don't have to worry in the first instance. It's if something happens, the strings do tear. Sometimes the garment does tear. So can you fix it? When you can fix it. And a lot of these things you don't necessarily have to have all the answers, but one of the advantages of learning is sometimes at least when there's a question.
Right.
Yeah, right. And then when you can ask your rabbi and you know what to ask.
I have a question for you, Rabbi.
Yes.
You had mentioned with a poncho where one of the corners are rounded, but also there's a split halfway on the poncho. How do you secure that? You keep that from ripping any further.
Yeah, so the poncho, if it has 4 corners, would need tzitzis. And so if you didn't want to put tzitzis onto your poncho, you can round off one of the corners. And I guess how you stop that where you cut it from tearing, I guess you have to sew the edge.
No, I'm talking about the split going in from the back halfway.
So the poncho is normally made like that, but let's say the capote, the suit jacket, long jacket I was talking about. So it's sewn at where the split stops. It's reinforced, so the split won't go
I
further.
understand that, but what do you use to reinforce it?
Whatever, cotton. There's
The tailoring question?
yeah. Whatever the tailor uses. Just regular sewing thread. Just not
Okay.
linen. If it's a woolen
Can
suit.
let me ask you, can you put a patch on the top of it to keep it from ripping any further?
You could sew the patch. You'd want to do it on the inside so it doesn't make your suit look funny. But you could, yeah.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you, Rabbi.
No problems.
I want to see
Before you were
the
saying something about Prince Albert's suit, I think there used to be a tobacco called Prince Albert.
That's
And
affirmative.
right, and there was an old practical joke where, say, like a teenager would call up a drugstore and ask, "Do you have Prince Albert in a can?" And when they said yes, they would say, "Let him out." And so that kind of reminded us. So then I got the idea that a similar joke would be to call up a sofa and ask, "Do you have rabbinic tons to fill in?" And when he says yes, say, "You should return them to him."
That's right. Could do that. There's we joke about it, but actually prank call people is not nice. But there's one of my kids has a tape that someone put out for Purim where they made prank calls or different things, and he calls a hardware store, and he asks them if they sell locks. He says, "Of course." And he says, "Well, can I have a bagel with lox and cream cheese?" That was But anyway, so we're going to start chapter 10, the laws of tefillin. So again, it's more theoretical for the ladies, but as we said when we started the laws of tzitzis, it's actually very interesting that whatever the men achieve through put on tefillin, women are born with naturally. They're already on that level. So even though the practical may not be as relevant, but for ladies, you get to see what you already accomplish, what you're achieving. Okay, so Simon Yud, chapter 10, Hilchos Tefillin, the laws of tefillin. Okay. Aleph, mitzvahs tefillin, he gam kein mitzvah yikaram oid. The mitzvah tefillin is also a very precious mitzvah. Why? Shkol ha-Torah huksha tefillin. The entire Torah is compared or is similar to the mitzvah tefillin. How's that? Shneimar, because it says in the Torah that you should put on tefillin, and then it says, "Why lamantia Torah Hashem b'ficha?" In order that Hashem's Torah should be in your mouth. So somehow, by putting on tefillin, this is like you have the entire Torah. Tefillin. Someone who does not put on tefillin, again, we're not talking about out of ignorance, or someone who does not yet appreciate the beauty of the mitzvah. Someone who knows and that deliberately not putting on tefillin in order to go against God. This is the example of someone who rebels against Hashem with his body. So most people who don't put on tefillin today in the world, Jews, I would say, because they really, many people don't even know such thing exists. And if they know such a thing exists, they certainly aren't aware of the importance and the significance. And it's a lack of awareness. And I would say, it's often on Fridays you have yeshiva students who go to stores and offices and put tefillin on with people. And it could be for some of these people, even though they're only wearing tefillin once a week, but for them, it's not something they grew up with, and it's in the workplace, and whether it's reality or their perception, people looking at them and different things, it could be their effort to put on tefillin that once a week or once a month, what it happens to be, might be more valuable than someone like me putting on every day that, my parents educated me.
robotically.
That's right. Well, hopefully I don't do it robotically, but try not to. But it's I was brought up that way. It's never been a question. It's always sort of been part of my life. So it's a whole. It's within my comfort zone. Totally. So so we're certainly not saying that every Jew who doesn't put on tefillin at the current moment is going to war against God with their body. But if there was someone who knew all the significance and they were aware and they know it's what it is, and they deliberately say no, so that's a seriousness. Now, someone who puts on non-kosher tefillin, they're not good. Not only did they not fulfill the mitzvah, but every day that he made a bracha, he said Hashem's name for no reason. So you have to really be careful. I've someone that I learned in yeshiva with, and he got to fill in his bar mitzvah, and he put them on every single day. He got them checked for the first time when he was 18. And the scribe who put his tefillin together put the little scrolls that are inside, he put them in upside down, which meant it wasn't good. So for 5 years, he'd actually never done the mitzvah of tefillin. Wasn't his fault. He was trying his best. But so this is also, you have to be, tefillin is the most probably complex thing that a person has to really make sure you know where you're getting your tefillin from. Sometimes people go to Israel and they pick it up one of these Judaica stores there, and the sometimes just cons. It's not even close to real tefillin. Sometimes the storekeeper is conning you. Sometimes he's a victim too. He got conned. But you have to really, really be careful who you get tefillin from. So, Isaac, you wanted to say something?
I just said you go to the shuk, to get a deal.
Yeah. When it comes to tefillin, if it's too good to be true, it usually is. It's my son, before he was married, he spoke to you. I think about tefillin, went to the class. So he was putting together, we'll call it, let's say, entry-level tefillin for people that perhaps wouldn't have bought otherwise, and at cost. And he was painting the boxes himself and sanding them down and really taking all the costs out. And it was still like $400, $450. That was, one of the rabbis of the community couldn't believe it, and he says, "There's no such thing as tefillin under $500. They can't possibly be kosher." And made a whole thing, which is anyway. So my son had told him he didn't tell me, I told him what he's actually doing, and how he, it's just so people can do the mitzvah. Since he's married, as a family, it's a little bit hard to do that. But it's when the deal sounds too good, it is. Or unfortunately, there's even a. It sounds terrible, but it's there's a bit of a market in stolen tefillin. If people, there was a fellow that I know, about 20 something students in the yeshiva that tefillin was stolen. They left them in the shul in the yeshiva, and they came back after lunch or whatever it was, and they're all gone. So some of them had them insured, some of them, were wealthier, whatever happened to be. But this fellow, he had to look for a secondhand pair. Didn't have the means to get a new nice pair of tefillin. So he saw this place advertised, and he goes there, and he sees his own tefillin there, along with everyone else's. And a lot of people have their names embroidered on the bags. So he asked the fellow to hold the pair while he went to the ATM. Really went back to the yeshiva, and 20 rather irate bochrim came and collected the all the tefillin. It was
Rabbi, does the tefillin get buried with the person?
No, it doesn't get buried. When they're worn out, we bury them.
Okay.
But if they're still good, so
They are donated to the shul.
yeah. Well, sometimes so.
Pass
My
them down.
my great
deal.
grandfather, he passed away when my grandfather was 12, and he left his tefillin, his kiddush cup also, the siddur. He left to his grandson, who was my grandfather, and my grandfather left them to me. So I have, well, the siddur actually is in my father's house, but the kiddush cup and the tefillin from my great grandfather. So when I was in high school, can't recall exactly when, I had them checked, and the sofa said they were still kosher. It says they were, they're aging. Better to use another pair, but you could make a brach on them. They're fine. I never got them checked since, because when tefillin have a chazaka, they're known to be kosher, a presumption of being kosher. You can consider them kosher, but if you open them up and see there's a problem, you can't close it back. So although I don't use them, just keep them as heirloom. But so I have my great grandfather's tefillin, and his kiddush cup. Just as a side point, he was in Russia in the 1880s, which Russia in those days was, Ukraine, parts of Poland, so exactly where, I'm not sure. But in the 1880s, there was terrible pogroms. So he ran away, ended up in England. So the way that they helped refugees who didn't speak English was they put them on a ship to Australia. So anyway, that's how the family ended up there in the 1880s. And everyone says, "Oh, you're a convict." It's people can trace themselves back to convicts. It's like big yichus. It's like it's like a big thing. But
Son of
It's
a
a
pirate.
country of convicts.
sorry.
It's a country of convicts.
Well, even the first fleet
The
was more
beginning.
free settlers than convicts. But it's
Yeah.
it was never a majority of. It was always a minority, but they sent plenty of convicts. That's why it's so hard to trace yourself to convicts. There really weren't that many in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
And most of the ones who got sent there is because they stole a loaf of bread because they were starving. The real criminals got executed. They were hung or something. It's really all misfortunate people.
Yeah.
And but anyway, 8 Jews on the first fleet. So the entire time there's been Europeans in Australia, there's been Jews.
Oh.
Side point. So although yes, some people when they pass away they leave it to the shul or something. It's also nice. I think it's nice for families to try and hold on to these things.
Yeah, but if they don't have sons, then they
Yes.
don't.
Yeah, they do. And we had when I was rabbi in Parramatta in Australia, there was an older gentleman who he always knew that his mother's mother was Jewish, but he didn't consider himself Jewish. He wasn't raised Jewish. But the last few years of his life, he thank God he was able to come back, became really active part of the community, and came to shul, every day. Was kashik his house, mezuzahs, and at the end, when he realized his time was limited, he actually left his tefillin to a young boy. He's come to the shul who was almost bar mitzvah, and I had the merit to be able to present them to the bar mitzvah boy.
Very nice.
So it's yeah. So yep, it's a good thing to do. Okay, it looks like we ran out of time for today, so we'll continue the laws to fill next week. I feel funny on Sunday wishing everyone a good Shabbos, but I don't see this Sunday. So have a good Shabbos and a good week and a blessed week. And God willing, I'll be
Thank you,
back
Rabbi.
Have a good Shabbos.
in Arizona next week.
Good to see
Thank
everybody.
you, Rabbi.
Oh, it's only today?
Sorry?
Today the blessing should be have good weather.
Oh,
Amen.
okay, take care.
How long are you going to be in Australia?
So I'm leaving Thursday. And I came
Nesiya
last week.
Tova Uftucha.
My father's 80th birthday.
Oh,
Oh my God.
can I know?
Your father?
Admei Esrim Gezinti Yoren.
Amen, amen.
Amen.
Take care.